Flyers get their guy last night, but is it the right guy? And could there be another netminder perhaps coming to the Flyers? There's some talk about that as well. Fresh off the Stanley Cup playoffs and his role between the benches, where he got to work with Darren Pang. I thought that was awesome. We welcome into the show Brian Boucher. Bouch, how you doing on this Saturday morning?
I'm doing well, Pete. How you doing? Exciting night last night for some young hockey players to get drafted in the NHL draft, and I'm personally looking forward to the off season. It was a busy spring, so looking forward to some time away.
Yeah, you definitely have earned a break, Bouch. So let's start with that. Do you remember when you were drafted and what that process was like?
Yeah, I do remember it. 95 was my draft year. It was in Edmonton, Alberta, and I went late in the first round, but had no idea that I would actually go in the first round. I think I was rated early second round, so I got to watch my best friend growing up. We grew up together in Woonsocket, Rhode Island. Brian Berard go first overall, so he had already been picked long ago, and at number 1 by Ottawa. And I just remember being in the stands with my family, and he was down on the draft floor. He had gotten done with all his pictures and stuff like that, and now he's getting ready to enjoy the draft. And he pointed at me. He saw on the board that I was getting picked by Philadelphia at 22. So he kind of gave me a heads up, and I looked at him. I was like, "What are you talking about?" And then I heard my name, and from that point on, it was a blackout moment. You just, as an 18-year-old kid, to hear your name called and then go down to the stage. I mean, it's just it's a really cool thing.
The pride of Mount St. Charles Academy, Brian Boucher with us here talking a little NHL draft. And what was the hype in 95 the way it is now? I mean, it's quite an event now.
No, certainly nowadays with the television coverage that we have in the United States, NBC Sports does a great job of having the first round on, and the NHL Network does a great job of having the pre and post, and then they do rounds 2 through 7 today. So there's a lot more visibility now for fans. I think before it was kind of like an underground movement that watched the draft, and I'm not so sure the teams, the mindset was probably a little different back then too. I mean, free agency was an area of the game where you could improve your hockey club through picking up older players, and if you had the money as an organization to spend on older quality veterans, you could certainly make your team better instantly through free agency. But now with the salary cap and the way things are, you have to develop from underneath, and you have to draft well. So, these 2 days end up being a big day on an organization's calendar. And if you don't draft well and you don't have draft picks, you're going to have a difficult time sustaining success. So it's a big day, and I know it's probably something that gets overlooked, I think, from a fans perspective, because it's not, watching, these players, and there's not a chance to win a game in this particular day. But a lot of teams and organizations' success begins on these 2 days right here.
So how about the way the Flyers went last night? I mean, you saw, I'm sure, on social media and the number of people that were out there, 72 goal scorers, hard to pass up, and yet everybody thought Chuck Fletcher should go one way. He went the other way.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think the mindset, for a lot of general managers and guys that run hockey teams, they want to build on the back end, they want to build through the middle, first and foremost, and then scoring wingers. I think they probably feel like you can find those guys, or later on in the draft, or maybe they're not as much of a priority. And for the Flyers, I think by trading down, they pick up a second round pick, and they probably knew that their guy was going to be there 3 picks later, and they end up getting by all accounts. And look, I don't claim to be an expert on these 18-year-old kids, because I was more focused on the NHL players. But by all accounts, Cameron York seems to be a very smooth defenseman, a guy that can be a top 3 defenseman down the road. And if they felt like they could wait until 14 to get him and add another pick in the second round, then that's a pretty good move for Chuck Fletcher. I mean, I'm sure some fans probably want a 72 goal scorer in Cole Caulfield, but maybe I'm not, and I'm just suspecting, I'm not, maybe the thought about Caulfield was that maybe, some of his success was based upon Jack Hughes getting him the puck. And, so is he really that much of a pure goal scorer? Time will tell. He's certainly going to be in a pressure cooker in Montreal, going number 15 overall. And that's a heck of a place to play, for a young player. But I don't know, maybe that was a mindset as to why you wouldn't snag a guy like Caulfield earlier in the draft. But this is such a deep draft. I don't think teams can go wrong with the guys that they got in the first round. There's just so much talent, from 1 to 31.
Brian Boucher with his former Flyers goalie, NHL on NBC analyst. I would expect you to have answered that way since you did play goal. And yes, the mindset usually is to build from the goal out. And obviously Chuck Fletcher has been working to retool the defensive core for sure. He's added a pair of 6'2" defensemen, and then he got one of the offseason's coveted free agents in Hayes. I will say this too, by the way, you're talking about how much did the Jack Hughes impact have on Caulfield. The name that I immediately thought of was, so this is like an 18-year-old version of back in the day when Rob Brown blew up because Mario Lemieux was feeding him the puck.
Yeah, and I think when you think about Rob Brown, I think most people would think that a career that kind of went down the toilet, right? I mean, when he left Pittsburgh. So who knows? I mean, look, I don't want to. I'm not Caulfield's a heck of a talent, and that the talent that was on that U.S. NTDP team this year in the 2001 birth year, it's probably going to go down as unprecedented. I mean, I don't know if we'll ever see 8 American kids taken in the first round from a particular team like we saw this year. There's a lot of talent, so I certainly do not want to discredit the kid. He looks like a sniper. If you for the Chicago Blackhawks, you look at a guy like Alex DeBrincat. A lot of people didn't think he was big enough to play. Caulfield's 5'7", and DeBrincat's 5'7", and DeBrincat's done nothing but fill the back of the net since he's come to the Chicago Blackhawks. So I don't want to discredit Caulfield. I'm sure he's a heck of a sniper. Time will tell. But look, I mean, when you have choices and you have a priority of needs as an organization, sometimes it's about taking the best player, but it's also about, okay, take the best player to fill your need first. And if an organization's mindset is to build from the back end first and foremost, and the players are equal, then you go with what your need is. And I'm just speculating. I've not talked to Chuck Fletcher, and I don't know if that was the case, but certainly, the Flyers have had done a nice job of drafting from the back end and building in that regard. And it's not something that you want to dry up anytime soon. I think you want to keep a steady influx because of the cap situation. You got to make sure that you're on your toes and you've got people to fill in gaps if gaps present themselves. And if you have a surplus of defensemen, and you can always use some of those, that surplus to fill needs up at the forward position. But the defense position is probably one of the biggest priorities on most general managers' plates.
Yeah, no doubt, Bouch. A lot of people were worried about the picks that he was giving up, for example, when he gave up the second rounder for Justin Braun, but yet then he walks out of Rogers Center with 4 picks inside the first 75, and in what's considered to be a deep draft like you talked about last night. We're talking with Brian Boucher, former Flyers goalie and NHL analyst, and getting his thoughts both on the draft and also, you said, Bouch, the 18-year-olds you may not know so much, but the actual NHL players, you're all over that. And I just saw the name pop up the other day in anticipation of the draft of a possibility of James Reimer maybe coming to the Flyers as they've got a logjam in Florida. And, of course, we know Florida drafted another goalie last night. So would that be a good fit as a backup to Carter Hart?
It could. It could. I mean, James Reimer, at times in his career has played some good hockey. He's a hardworking guy, a guy that takes care of himself off the ice. So I think, from a reputation standpoint that way, you don't have to worry about him. But, in the National Hockey League, it's a result-based business. And you could be, the hardest working guy, the best guy in the locker room, and be a perfect role model. But if you don't deliver on what you're supposed to do, which is to stop the puck, I mean, it's going to be hard to find a job. So I'm concerned about his level of play in the last couple of years. But sometimes a fresh start can be just what a goaltender needs. It's happened in my career a couple of times, and you go to a place where you just feel comfortable. It just feels right. It's hard to pinpoint why, and all of a sudden you can be a different goaltender. So for Reimer, he played in a tough environment in Toronto when he started his career. Went to a place in Florida where maybe there's not as much attention, and maybe the mind can wander a little bit, or maybe there's not the same level of excitement around the club. And I had that situation happen to me where I went from Philadelphia, a place that was, pretty hockey crazy, to a place in Phoenix where, people didn't even know who the Coyotes were. It's a different mindset. And, and I struggled a bit in Phoenix, and certainly the team in Phoenix was not as good as the team in Philadelphia, but I always longed to want to get back to a hockey market where hockey was important and the fan base was passionate about the team. So who knows? I mean, maybe it works out that way. Maybe it doesn't. It'll be interesting to see how it plays out in the next couple of weeks to see how they position. But there's no doubt that the Flyers have a very, very good one at number one, and it looks to be that way for a long, long time in Carter Hart, and that's what fans should be excited about. But if you can bring a guy in that can help this kid along and not give him too much of a workload early on, that'll go a long way to establishing his NHL career. You don't want to overwhelm him. You don't want to put him in situations where you're forced to play him, and maybe it's not the best situation. There's a ton of talent there, but you got to keep in mind that the stuff between the ears is super important for a young goaltender, and you want to make sure that you give him what he can handle. And when he shows that he can handle that, then you give him a little bit more and you build upon that. And you got to be patient with a young goaltender, knowing that there's going to be some bad days, and there may be a bad week or two in a stretch for a couple of times. And you got to be able to give him that support where maybe he can take a breather and not feel he's got the weight of the world on his shoulders. But I'm excited to see how it plays out for Carter Hart down the road and see how he progresses. And I think there's a bright future for the Philadelphia Flyers with regards to when you look at the division and how the other teams, they're not all trending upwards either. There's some teams that are flatlining and maybe going to be regressing in the next little while, and the Flyers, hopefully for them, they can take advantage of that.
Carter Hart, who finished 9th in voting for the Calder Memorial Trophy, the Rookie of the Year trophy, despite not making his NHL debut until December. We're talking with Brian Boucher, former Flyers goalie, not once, not twice, but 3 times. And I don't know what you're talking about, Bouch. You said you struggled in Phoenix, not for 332 minutes and 1 second.
Yeah, I had 5 good games, so if that's what you want to remember me
5.5. Don't short yourself that half.
You're right. 5.5 games.
I mean, that record still stands. Is that going to be broken?
I'm everybody. The stock answers records are meant to be broken, but I don't know. I mean, with the you got to understand when that record was set, the league was different. We had a 2-line. We had offsides for a 2-line pass.
Mm-hmm.
There's not as much offense. We played to a tie in overtime. There was no shootout. There was no 3-on-3 overtime. And I think that alone, the 3-on-3 overtime, is where a lot of goals are scored. So unless they change the rule and say, if you give up a goal in the overtime session, your shutout still stands, then maybe there's a chance. But if 3-on-3, I mean, it's a nightmare for a goaltender. I mean, within the first 25 seconds, it can lead to a 2-on-1, and the game can be over. So I think it's going to be one that's really difficult, just with the set of rules now that the NHL has employed. But I think records can be broken. There's a lot of talented guys now coming up. Who knows? But as long as it's still here, I'm proud to have it.
I love the 3-on-3, but of course I didn't play goalie except for that one time I talked about earlier in the show when they threw me in an Albany Devils intermission and I wore regular skates, Bouch, okay, first and foremost. Second of all, like a jockey in horse racing, somebody had to help me get dressed because, I didn't know what went where. And I basically just sat in net like Big Hero 6, like the guy from the Baymax from Big Hero 6. I was basically a live human version of a shooter tutor as the mites on ice all took shots at me. But, hey, you do what you do to get your name out there, right?
Absolutely. Everybody should try it sometime, and then they'd have an appreciation for how difficult it is, and maybe they wouldn't be so hard on the goalie.
Yeah, take it easy on the goalie. Let's finish with this. Tell me about working with Darren Pang, because I thought that was so cool. Panger was a great between the benches guy, and here you got to work with him. Couple of goalies doing a little Stanley Cup coverage.
Yeah, it was great. For him, working for, doing the Blues telecast, and then to get to work with him on the radio that one game in the Stanley Cup final. Always enjoyed being around Panger. When I was in Phoenix, he was a color analyst for the Phoenix Coyotes, I believe, for a year and a bit when I was there, and then I got traded. So I got to spend a lot of time with him at the rink. Just enjoyed being around him. He's a great guy. Sees the game very well, obviously, as a goaltender. Most goaltenders do. But it was great to work with him. It's something that doesn't happen very often. And he was so happy for the St. Louis Blues to win, obviously working for this, for the Fox telecast there and covering the St. Louis Blues. For those guys, they spend the year with the team, and they really are an extension of the hockey club. And he just was so darn excited for the success of Craig Berube and
Boucher.
And the St. Louis Blues. So it was pretty cool to be a part of that.
It was great to have you on, too. I'm sorry we ran up against the hard break, but we'll try again later in the summer. Enjoy your time off, Brian Boucher, and thanks for being a guest on the Pete Thompson Show.
All right, Pete. Take care.